Hello and welcome to Teenagers Untangled. I'm Rachel Richards, journalist, parenting coach, mother of 2 teenagers and 2 bonus daughters. It's summer in the UK and Susie's away, but I have some great interviews lined up. And in today's episode, I thought we'd review the topic of screen time. Now, if you've been reading the papers or you're on social media, then you're probably aware of Jonathan Haidt's book, Anxiety Generation. It's a really interesting read, and he provides lots of links to the data he uses to come up with the conclusion that we should be limiting early teen access to social media while increasing their time spent connecting in real life. Few of us would argue with his position, but as any parent will know, it's also a lonely, rocky path to travel if the other parents around you don't agree. Now, I've been doing some coaching looking at screen time limits for families, and a study by the University of California published in the Paediatric Research journal caught my eye because it included 10,000 12 to 13-year-olds and has some clear guidelines for parents. In this episode, I'm going to outline the conclusions they make in the study. Then you can listen to the original chat between Susie and I about screen time. So let's start with the study. They set out to look at the way parents behaved and identify how it impacts on screen time and problematic social media, video game and mobile phone use. You can find a link to the study in the podcast notes if you'd like to read it yourself, but here are the clear guidelines. The most positive impact is if we parents place limits on our own screen use, especially in front of our kids. The most negative thing to do is using screen time as a reward or a punishment, because they found it tends to increase the desire to be on their screens. And that's exactly what Natasha Devon said in my interview about how to help your teens be their best selves online. Allowing screens in bedrooms and at mealtimes was linked to increased time on them overall and a greater chance of addictive use. Now, this is all obvious, really. I mean, it interrupts the opportunity to connect around the table or for adequate sleep. When we parents keep track of our children's use and set limits, less screen time was reported. And that's it in a nutshell. In all honesty, the study really pleased me because the recommendations are exactly what I've been doing at home. Phones are banned at the table, they're not to be kept in bedrooms at night, and we have buddied up to control each other's screen time. So I have the screen time code for both my daughters, and they have mine. Now that means we all have time controls on both social media and when we can use our phones. My phone now switches off at 9:30 at night, except for calls, WhatsApp and Audible and Spotify. In all honesty, it was irritating to begin with, but I now find it genuinely liberating. I regularly check my teenagers' screen use and have judgment-free discussions about where they feel they might be struggling with too much pointless screen time. And they have the right to do the same with me. Now, you may balk at the idea of being accountable to your own kids, but look, I reason that if I tell my kids that my screen time doesn't matter, but theirs does, I'm just reinforcing the idea that when you grow up, it's fine to squander valuable time, and that the mark of being an older teenager is to spend as much time as you want online, which is not what we want. I'm trying to create an environment where we're all held accountable because screen use is tricky for everyone. As a result, my use of social media has dropped dramatically, and my sleep and my real life productivity and my fun, it's all rocketed. It didn't happen overnight, but I can genuinely recommend this as a system. Now, that's all I have to say on the study. Have a listen to our original talk about screen time. All of the research I did for it still stands up. Now, I started out by trying to pin down some reliable facts. There are lots of headlines, but when I dig behind them, they're often small sample studies and what I would consider clickbait because they feed on our fears. But I'll go with one older survey from 2019 by Common Sense Media, a non-profit organisation which has a wealth of information for parents. They found that for older kids aged 13 to 17, the number of time on their screens has climbed to 7 hours and 22 minutes, but that was even before COVID really struck. What happened in COVID, according to Educational Technology, is that the majority of time spent on screens shifted from being, something to do with learning to being much more social and entertainment driven. Susie, do you have issues with screen time in your home? How do you, as a mindfulness coach, perceive it?
It's a minefield. Yes, we have issues. I have 2 boys and a girl. My boys are quite into gaming, especially the eldest. He's a big gamer. He loves gaming. And, during COVID, and I know that I'm absolutely not alone in this, I was almost encouraging them to go and game because that was how they got their social contact. Obviously that has changed and they don't need that anymore, but we've got sort of stuck in probably gaming more than otherwise would have been. And my daughter is, she doesn't game. Well, she does a bit, but it's different. And maybe her screen time is a bit more passive. She's on her phone a lot, talking to friends, but she'll maybe watch TV more, which is more sort of passive watching as opposed to engaging and actually being sociable through her headphones. And I find it confusing because, there's a presumption that screen time is bad, end of. And maybe it is, but we don't know yet.
Or maybe it isn't.
Maybe it isn't. Questioning that presumption, I do that. And I'm thinking, well, I can see there are downsides to gaming or to being online. And I can also see there are positives. But the reality is we don't have long-term studies of what this generation will look like from having so much screen time. We just simply don't know. And I don't know whether, I'm not saying that's good or bad. It's just, it sows seeds of doubt in my mind when I'm trying to navigate it. We just don't know. And I think social media is brilliant and gaming is so much fun. They love it. I don't think that's the problem. I think the problem is getting stuck in it.
Yes.
When we can't get off it and do anything else, myself included, because, it's designed to draw us in, isn't it?
And that's a really good point, because Common Sense Media says we need to shift from evaluating the quantity of screen time to the quality of the content and what's actually happening when we're looking at our screens. And when you talk about the getting stuck, that's the one area we do know a lot about, because we know that these companies that are trying to attract people to the screens spend a huge amount of money on the best minds in the business and how you actually get people there and keep them there. So according to the Harvard Education Review, social media apps use variable reward schemes, which were introduced by psychologist B.F. Skinner in the 1930s. And in his experiments, he found that mice responded most frequently when they couldn't guess when they were going to get a reward. So humans apparently are no different. And if we perceive a reward to be delivered at random and checking for the reward comes at very little cost, then we will check habitually. And programmers know this, and they are working very hard behind the screens to make sure that we keep checking, because eyes on screens means money.
Yes.
And the rewards that they're talking about are oxytocin, which is that love hormone, that molecule of social connection that we release anytime there's a tweet or a message, or it tells us that we're actually interacting properly with someone, even if we're just reading a message on social media or Dopamine, any positive social stimuli can result in a reward of dopamine. And those results tend to be short term. So they create an addictive feedback loop. So you get the dopamine hit and then you need another hit to get it again. And most apps are optimized to encourage you to keep compulsively checking for notifications to get that dopamine hit. And then the cortisol, the fight or flight hormone, comes in, because if you're the type of person who's been doing the checking regularly, like the dopamine hit every 15 minutes or so, if you put the phone away, then after a bit, you're going to end up with a cortisol rush because you're a bit fearful that maybe you're going to miss something.
Oh, God.
And then to get rid of the cortisol rush, you'll go back to the phone to check it. Yeah. So this is what's happening behind the scenes. Yeah, it's exploiting it. And Instagram even has notification algorithms that sometimes withhold likes. I spoke to my hairdresser the other day, and she'd been doing these reels, which are really great for people who want to understand how to do their hair. She's lovely. And she said she'd done this reel and spent ages creating it. And then when she put it up, she hardly had any views. And she thought, what's going on? And so she kept checking. And then suddenly there was a big amount later on. And and when I spoke to her about this, she said, because Instagram withholds some of the likes and the views so that you keep checking, and then they'll give you your hit. Ugh. Because you're primed now to feel much more excited about getting that. And then you'll keep coming back to it.
Of course.
It's amazing. It's amazing how these things work. And I think understanding that helps.
It really helps. And teenagers can understand that. I think I was talking to my son about it yesterday. He gets that. I mean, there's one thing understanding it in your head, and then there's another thing, not following it. That's really, really difficult, especially when they are doing that deliberately. But knowing it, being aware of that is really helpful.
One of the really positive things is the use of the internet to hunt down things we're interested in.
Yes. So I try to, my screen use needs looking at. I try to use social media. I mean, I use it for my work. I use it quite a lot for work. It's really helpful. But I also try and follow people who I think are interesting, and that I have learnt an awful lot from social media, and I think it's amazing and brilliant.
And you meet people in areas that you could never possibly.
Absolutely.
You message them and they message you back.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
How does that happen?
I know.
How is little me able to talk to these people? Yes,
it's fun, and it's really, really good. My son I was talking to him last night, and he knows loads about particular topics in the news that he's interested. People who are doing interesting things and stuff that he's interested about. He will sit and read and listen, and it's on TikTok or wherever it is, and he's really knows a lot about it. So it's really good. Again, the problem is when we get stuck in it, and also another problem I think is the good old comparisonitis, which is the toxic part, isn't it? It's the bit where we see everybody else having a lovely life and, get FOMO, and, teenagers, particularly girls, but I'm sure boys as well, I don't look like that, all the toxic stuff.
The problem with the social media is it completely amplifies that, because everybody's living their best life online. Yeah. And so all you see is a stream of people who are going to amazing holiday destinations and looking their best, which is, 85 to 90% of the time, we don't look our best.
No.
So most of the time, nobody looks like that. But it's even hard to step away from that and get that in your head. And the number of research studies have been pointing out that this low self-esteem is correlated to time on social media, because it's linked to increased feelings of loneliness, anxiety, depression, envy. It is a problem.
Yeah.
So certainly having conversations about it can be really helpful, and talking to them about the stuff that you've been saying, where if you encourage them to hunt down things that genuinely interest them,
and also maybe encourage them, and I'm just thinking aloud, to follow particular people, because there is a pushback against some of this. There's now an awareness of all of this, how toxic it can be, and there are loads of people on Instagram or wherever you follow, who are against that and who are trying to present normality, whether that's body image or being a parent, or for the adults, but trying to show what does a normal life look like.
Yes, and finding really communities, communities of people who have interests like you.
Yeah,
it's very enabling, and actually one of the great things about COVID, ironically, is that people who are disabled or unable to leave their house, agoraphobics, all sorts of other people, found that it was a really great, that for the first time in their life, they were able to connect with people because it was online.
Yeah.
So this move to online has benefited some people.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, there is so much, and I think it gets labelled as just being negative because we're frightened, because we don't know what the effects are, and maybe the fearmongers are correct. We just don't know.
Yes.
But there are definitely positive things in it. So if we can pick them out and embrace them, and then maybe, I don't know, set limits, as to, I'm talking about myself here and my own children.
Or I have some research that will help us with that.
Set limits on it, so that we're not, we're doing other things. We're connecting properly rather than just through this.
And I think that's another thing that's happened because of COVID, is because we've actually got out of the habit of saying, I'll meet you for a coffee, or organising parties, or going out to go and do other things, because you think, actually I could just stay at home.
Yeah, it's comfortable. Yeah.
Yes. And so if you're not a massive extrovert, it can just feel much easier not to bother. And I've had to check myself. I've been texting someone and then thought, for God's sake, pick up the phone. Yeah. And the conversation is so much more enjoyable, funny and fun. And what I did notice with my daughters during half term was that when we would get together, we'd be a big family with another family, and we'd get together and all the kids were on their phones. And my older daughter, who's very disciplined about her phone use and doesn't really, she can see the problems, turned to me later and she said, you know what, everything's online now. I can't, I have to exist online, because she wasn't on Instagram. She wasn't on these other things. And she said, I don't exist for this generation if I'm not engaging in those platforms.
Yeah, but we still don't know what that means, because every generation has the adults go, you're doing too much of that. You mustn't do that, because you'll end up, where will this end? And each generation goes, yeah, but it's fine, just chill out. And I don't know. I'm just, there is the part.
I think it's a very good point. What I see when I see this happening is I see us shifting to what Mark Zuckerberg wants, which is this metaverse where we're all living online. And I think the point about humans is that we have something that computers don't have, and that we need to teach our children to channel that and get in contact with that, because that's what will define us and make us different. And when it comes to the work environment that they're going to be in, that's the thing that will trump the computer age.
Absolutely. I mean, I totally agree with that. I just think maybe that would be a phase. I don't know.
Absolutely.
And then they'll find their own way in it, possibly, don't know. But there's an uncertainty in it, isn't there? We don't know what
we don't know. We don't know. So rather than panicking, we need to just find ways of channeling things. Yes. So what to do? Psychology Today had an article on it that I thought was one of the better ones. And they said, look, teens need practical guidance on how to disengage. We need to parent them. I love these talks because they make me go back into, okay, where am I with this? Not doing very well. When we first set up their devices, we're like, oh, well, I'm going to do this, and I'm limiting their screen time. And my children were brought up in a very offline environment. And suddenly I realized, looking at them now, that the older one has done all the pushing, and she's got very healthy habits because I was very careful, and the younger one has just snuck in with her massive usage. And I suddenly looked and thought, oh my God, she's online all the time. And so I've realized I have to go back to her and think, okay, let's go back to what's happening. And I said to her, so let's have a look at how much time you've spent on TikTok. She was horrified because she knows that her use of TikTok isn't really giving her a huge amount, and it's not actually, it doesn't feel good.
No.
So for her, that those 10 minutes you thought you spent on TikTok that turned into 3 hours, is not making her feel good.
No.
So we need to somehow interrupt that process,
because it can feel good for a bit. I mean, I did try and teach my younger boy particularly, who really gets stuck in it. What does it feel like when you're in it? So sort of from a mindfulness way, noticing you're on it, and it's actually really fun for a bit. And I'm the same. It's lovely for a bit. And then you reach a point
where you've seen 7 pictures of otters.
Yeah. And you start to numb out, and it feels a bit, ugh. Yeah. And at that point, or he was gaming and he was, getting really raged by that particular game at that point, when can you notice just before that kicks in, tune into what's going on in your body or your thoughts or whatever, and then take a break. Unfortunately, the draw of, I found with him anyway, the draw of the social media is because they are, as you were explaining, they're deliberately trying to get you to stay on.
You're up against it with these.
It was too much to fight against.
I think that's a discussion to have when they're not online, and when you're having a sort of, okay, let's have a think about what's going on here. What do you want? Because rather than imposing upon a teenager a regime, we need to have a sit down and a discussion about what they're trying to get out of their lives when they feel at their happiest. And if that is spending a lot of time online, rather than saying, well, you're wrong, looking at why it is that they get so much out of that. And one of my friends said that she'd actually had a conversation with all the other mothers and said, okay, so the gaming time is between this window and this window. Yeah. And she could then say to her son, well, you're not missing out because your mates aren't online.
That's a brilliant way of doing it. I think for younger teens, I think my 17-year-old would be like, why are you talking to my friends' mates?
Stop,
you don't even know them. That's weird. The younger ones, that's a brilliant idea. And I did have a conversation with him. I remember saying, tell me about the gaming. What do you get out of it? And he was really adamant, he got a lot out of it in a really positive way. It was sociable. It was exciting. He felt he was learning, he ramped it up massively to try and win me over. But, that his for him, there were loads of positives in it. And that was quite interesting, actually.
It's just reminded me off the top of my head of a study by Dr. Eric Sigman. When you're gaming, the levels of cortisol go up and your body has a release of the sugars so that you can run, because it's a fight or flight hormone. And yet all you're doing is staying sedentary. and that's actually not very good for us. So the interesting question is, should we be, breaking it up? If they're gaming, then going out and doing something that involves some exercise. It's how sedentary are we as a result? Yeah. One lady I saw had a son who was on his Xbox and YouTube all the time and then behaving appallingly, getting into rages, treating his family badly. And she said, "Oh, I don't know what to do." And everyone said, "Take them away from him." And he was transformed. And then she was saying, "I don't know, should I give it back to him?" Well, we need to have some real discussions in that situation, because you've then got somebody who's got a problem managing it.
Yeah.
If your teenager's performing well at school and they're otherwise well adjusted, it's more about just managing it, isn't it?
It's hard though.
Very hard. Now, setting screen time, Android and Apple devices have screen time features that indicate how long one has been using the device. You can actually go onto these phones and set screen times. For the younger ones, you can actually put a pin in that you put in so that they can't override it.
Yeah.
And I know one of my daughters has a friend whose parents has put these in place, and she marches around going, I can't watch any more films. And she's furious. But the point is, if her parents hadn't done that, she would then have been spending all that time. All right, now she's marching up and down corridors furious. But the point is that she would then simply not come away. She would be spending huge amounts of time. The question with that is, rather than imposing the time, it's sitting down with your teenager and saying, okay, so what do you think is a reasonable amount of time? And negotiating it, and then saying, okay, let's set that and we can come back and review it in a week or so time.
I think that's a great idea. I've tried doing that because I do want mine to be less on. I think particularly one of them is on way too much. It hasn't worked for us. I don't know whether we haven't followed through, or they can, the idea of, that sounds like a really good amount of time doesn't really work in reality for us. I mean, that could work because then they're suddenly in that game, or they're suddenly doing that, and well, let's do it tomorrow, or I'll start tomorrow.
Right.
So it's hard. I don't know. There's one thing having a great idea, a good theory, and they can even go, no, it's brilliant. I don't want to be so much on my phone or whatever they're doing. But when they're actually stuck in it, then it's really, really hard to pull them.
Well, it's very interesting because I have tried that with myself and it works very effectively.
Right.
And
you're just more disciplined than we are.
Well, because what happens is the phone switches off and I can't, okay. It will stop you from accessing things. And I have the pin, so of course I can change it. But what it does is it concentrates my time effectively. So I then think, if I'm going to be on social media for this time, then I need to be effective during that time. So I'll have my social interactions. I'll check this, check that, and I'm off.
Yeah.
And it actually then concentrates me on doing things that are really enjoyable rather than scrolling.
Yes. And then I guess when you're doing it for yourself, you have buy-in, don't you? You're doing it for a reason. You want to be less on social media genuinely, otherwise you wouldn't be doing it. Whereas maybe it's different when we're discussing it with the teens. They maybe know in their heads they ought to not be on it so much, but actually they really want to be on it. So they're going to get around it.
I think it needs to be and it doesn't happen just once. It's an ongoing, okay, let's try this. Definitely. How do you feel about it? And actually the studies have found that FOMO and feelings of anxiety associated with constant connectivity drop off when you do limit the time.
Totally believe
because
that.
then they just know that it's not, they've had that limit and now it's time
and then
to
they
do
have to find something else to do.
Correct.
Which I find has been the difficult thing for my kids, because when you're gaming or doing things, on social media, it's really the reward is immediate and it's really big deliberately, as you've explained. So for trying to find another activity that matches that is almost impossible. So there's like a drop in interest, drop in excitement. Nothing matches to the excitement of, blitzing
because
a whole
of
people
the
online.
Dopamine, oxytocin, and cortisol.
So going to bake cookies isn't quite as fun.
Well, we do need to find things that do give those hits somewhere else, those rewards.
Or they get used to that it's just a different way of being.
Yes, absolutely. And understanding the benefit of it. So in other words, with my kids, what I have done is when they have been online for long periods of time, I then say to them, so tell me what fantastic stuff have you been doing? It perfectly, I'm not being facetious, just, give me some stuff. I'm really interested. And most of the time they can't tell me what has happened, what conversations they've had. There's nothing. It's blank. And I personally, this is literally no research about this at all, is I feel like when people are scrolling, what's happening is their brain needs some downtime. So they've started scrolling to give themselves that brain downtime, which is the same thing you'll get from going for a walk or just doing something repetitive, those mindless activities. But their mind isn't switching off because they're constantly being stimulated. So it's mimicking that, but it's not doing any of that at all. So it's actually makes you feel a bit uncomfortable. It just doesn't feel good.
Yeah.
So I have had conversations with them about that, and I am getting a lot of buy-in now because they understand, because I talk all the time about it. But I also think as a parent, we need to buy in too.
Yes.
So if you're at the table and it's supper time and you've got your phone out, then this is the big, and my Father Christmas one year gave my husband a phone cage,
Brilliant.
Which was marvellous. I looked at it and said, oh, darling, that's a really great idea. And that went in the middle of the table.
Brilliant.
And every time his phone went out, it went in the cage.
Yes.
And the kids thought that was hilarious.
Yeah.
And it sort of interrupted that mindless. And the worst thing is, what he's doing is reading the newspaper. Most of the time, his stuff on his phone, occasionally he's playing a game. But we know if he's playing a game because it's turned horizontally. So that's an easy one. Heyday. It's always Heyday. And then the other one is basically going through all the newspapers. Yeah. Rather than allowing that to happen, we are now buying newspapers so that he can sit and read a newspaper in front of my children, because otherwise they don't know that that's what he's doing.
No, they just presume that he's doing what they do on their phones. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And then I said to my daughter when we'd had a bit of a row and she wanted to make it up to me, I said, okay, you can make it up to me by reading the broadsheet downstairs and telling me about a story you find that's really interesting. And she did. And the story was fantastic. And at the end of it, she said, God, I found that really interesting. And I haven't really understood why people do that. And sometimes you've just got to interrupt the flow of where they are and just correct it so that then if they go back online, they may now be looking for information sources rather than looking for what the makeup is that's fashionable at the moment.
Yeah, no, and which can be fun for a while, can't it? But I love the idea of having actual newspapers, because they don't, and the idea that they presume what we're doing on our phones is what they're doing.
Of course,
because that's what they're doing, and we're probably not half the time. We're doing work, and
and that's the other one I saw, which I thought was fantastic, which is narrating what you're doing. And to the point of it irritating people. So the thing is that they see you on Instagram and they think, oh, she's on Instagram, I'm on Instagram. But what you're doing is something completely different, because you can say, right, so now what I'm doing is I'm answering somebody's question here. Now I'm posting a thing about the research that I've done. And now, and then you can pull out your phone and you say, so now what I'm doing is I've got the calendar up because you've got a dental appointment in 2 weeks' time. And I need to put in some notes in my diary for you to, and so that they can see that what you're actually doing is not scrolling. You've basically got a very, very busy life managing a million people's diaries. Yes. And that
do they not tell you to be quiet?
Well, they can try, but I can say, okay, fine, you do it.
Yeah.
Because the point is that then they start to understand that life, what you're doing is not chilling.
Yes.
That in a way, it also creates compassion, because they can see that you're not actually having a fun time necessarily. Just what you're doing is you're actually trying to run your life, because there was a book I read called it The Me Machine, that we're all walking around with our phones. But yours isn't a me machine if you're actually using it for work. It's basically a management machine.
Yeah.
And so as long as they can start to see that that's what adults are doing, then it starts to shift the debate and the discussion. Yeah,
no, definitely. How we use our phones is super important. I'm going to take that up to review today.
And you did bring up the very, very pertinent point, which is, what are we supposed to do when we're not on our phones? And there's a really fantastic link that I found, which was on parentingteensandtweens.com, which was 50 screen-free activities. And I actually thought they were really good. Sometimes you think, oh God, they're just filling space and
they're lame ideas.
But actually, really good one. So I'll put that in the podcast link. But they had game nights. They had Nerf gun war, organising and rearranging your room, geocaching, reading, having a massive clear out. It doesn't always have to be about a dopamine hit. It actually could be about, look, you actually need to live in this environment. Should we clear out all the stuff from when you were young?
Yes.
And give you an image, a new image.
Yes.
I've had an evening where my girls went into my wardrobe and tried on all my clothes.
Oh,
and we did a whole,
Brilliant.
What's the image you'd like to have this time? It's fun.
I get my boys to do that.
I think that's a really good idea.
That could be really fun.
But you see, it could be hilarious. When they were younger, we used to actually put the music on really loudly and dance around to it.
Yes.
Now, that may seem really lame when you're a teenager, but you could say, okay, what's your best hit? We want to listen to it for this amount of time. We do, and suddenly they're off their phones and you're all talking about music and we've moved.
That's really lovely. That's a really good way of doing it. Because I think sometimes we kind of we fall into our comfort zones, don't we? It's really comfortable just to sit and be on a screen because we're not actually doing anything. It's really passive. And to step out of that takes a bit of effort to do something else. So often they're like, I can't be asked.
Because we're all tired.
It's just easier to sit here. But we know, if you put a bit of effort in, then actually, you get energy out of it as well. But it's getting into putting that little bit of effort into stuff
and then reinforcing it afterwards by like, how are you feeling right now? I feel a bit sweaty and fun. It was great. And my kids, when I do things like that, they love it. To finish this off, the things that are suggested are setting down times for device use and up times. So you can say, so these are good times to use your device. So here are the down times during meals, hour before bedtime, meeting people. Restricted use in the morning. Don't use your phone as an alarm clock. Don't look at it first thing. Treat yourself to something much more interesting, like a coffee, or walk around the garden, or whatever you can do. Look out of the window and just breathe the air. Something different rather than frantically reaching for your phone and checking what's been going on.
It puts our stress hormones right
instantly. Taking a proper lunch break, which we will come to in our next section, and avoiding screens before bed. So really selecting times when you can have a downtime and saying, right, we all agree that that's going to be, and you can either have, selective downtime or a complete detox. If you've got a point where there's somebody in the house who really can't manage, who is exhibiting distressing behaviour, there are people can support this, but really they need to be away from the screen.
And one thing we can do, and I love it, it's a mindfulness thing, is called urge surfing. And you can use it with anything, but it's really good for digital. And it's when you feel the urge to pick up your phone or whatever it is you use.
Or wine.
Or a massive bag of sweets. Then you notice the urge and then you don't act on it. And you give yourself like 10, 15 minutes, you time it, and you say, right, in that amount of time, 15 minutes time, I'm going to allow myself to do the urge I'm feeling right now. But I'm going to make myself wait. So I can do it, but I don't have to. So you're not saying I'm not going to do it, because we resist it and we fight, and that's a whole different way of doing it. So you do go do something else. And then after the 15 minutes, quite often that urge has passed, or it hasn't, or you consciously choose, no, actually there is something I really need to check on my phone, so I am going to consciously pick it up, do that. But it's just a very different way of approaching it. It's
a speed bump in the road.
It's a speed bump.
Nice,
it's a good one. But you're tuning in, you're noticing the urge firstly, then you're putting it away and giving yourself permission to do it. You're not, restricting yourself massively. But you're allowing that urge, which is often a reaction to something else, some discomfort from something else. Something else has happened. Oh, I need to check. Oh, I need a glass of wine because I've just had a horrible conversation. You're reacting to something. So if you can allow that reaction just to pass and then decide what you're going to do, it's a good way of doing it.
Absolutely. And then finding the other rewards, things you could be spending your time doing, like planting seeds for the garden, anything.
Absolutely.
Well, that's it for this episode. Thanks for listening. If you found it useful, please send it on to somebody else who might benefit. If you want to send me an email, use teenagersuntangled@gmail.com, or you can come to my main website, which is www.teenagersuntangled.com. You can find reviews, you can find old episodes there, my occasional blogs. You can sign up to get the newsletter from me, which I tend to send out more regularly than I write the blogs. And that's it. So thank you for listening. Bye for now.